So, Rebecca, it's been a while.
Yeah, you were busy and I was busy and holidays.
Well, there's a backlog of emails.
Okay.
So this first email is from patron Kat from Texas. She says, does my counseling internship professor have countertransference with me? I'm a graduate student in a clinical mental health counseling program. My professor, she had to deal with me going through a tough time where I lost an internship. I was crying and I felt very rejected and unmotivated. Also, this professor at one point yelled at me for my inattention. In addition to this, all my meetings and classes with her are online, and I work online for 8 to 10 hours before having class with her. Thoughts on this thus far, Rebecca?
Well, not everybody's a fit with everybody. This person already sounds like they're in a really tough situation. I mean, if you're working 8 to 10 hours and then you go to class, you're drawing, I'm assuming, from an empty cup.
Yeah.
And so when I hear things like you're inattentive, I'm like, are you tired? Are you hungry? Are you distracted by life? I mean, you and I have both had students that were doing so many other things and then also going to school. And then, something would come up and it would be really hard to confront them because things were so intense for them. And then if you did confront them, chances are it didn't go well because they were drawing from such a low reservoir.
Did you ever yell at a student for inattention?
I once snapped at a student. This was right when cell phones were coming out, and I didn't understand what they were doing, like with their smartphone.
What'd you say?
I was just like, I was just shocked that they took their phone out in class.
Yeah.
Turns out they were like photographing a document or something, but I had just never seen that before. And I was like, but that was like in that time where, it was, I could still put my phone down, but no one else could.
Yeah.
Other things, students have felt like I snapped at them when I think I was just pointing out something important. But
Like what?
Oh, I had a client who... Student, sorry. I had a student who felt like I wasn't supportive enough about a paper that they had done. And I felt like what was happening in class was more important. And so I asked them to kind of move on from their paper and address what was happening in the room. And they were highly offended. I had a client actually in a situation like...
Student?
Sorry.
I mean, it was the art therapy program, which I heard rumors of through others and you, so I get it. But
I had a student whose life was so full and was so overwhelmed by every client. And when I pointed out in a case consult how these two things may be connected, it was so bad, and I've always wished I hadn't done it.
What'd you do?
I think I was like, you're working full time and you have a family and you're completely overwhelmed by every client that you have. How can you make room for this work? You're spending tens of thousands of dollars to attend this program.
Yeah.
And you barely have any consciousness for what's happening. And you're completely flooded by everything that happens. And they were not working at a very difficult internship site.
Were they willing to work on it?
We were not a match.
Right.
They couldn't hear it from me.
Right. What ended up happening?
I don't know, but I don't think they ever practiced a day in the field.
Okay. So a good call that you made.
Right. But not something that they wanted to hear.
Yeah. It sounds like with patron Kat that she was yelled at for her inattention, which it doesn't sound like you've done before. I mean, it could be...
But I've also never taught them. I don't know if this is online.
It's online.
It is. Yeah. I mean, that dynamic must be so frustrating to teach.
So, well, what I always tell people, and this is kind of for their sake, but also for mine, that, look, we're all adults, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s of years of age, and I'm not your dad. I'm not your principal. I'm not your high school teacher. So it's up to you. And I don't even necessarily have to say this very often because it's pretty obvious in the tone of the class and the syllabus and the expectations. But I might also say, if you don't want to pay attention, then don't. It's no skin off my back. You're required to be in class because that's a university standard, but you're not required to pay attention. I'll tell you that if you're not paying attention, you're going to probably not perform very well in this class, which could result in you failing this class, which I have no problems doing. I'm extremely at peace, and I sleep well at night. In fact, I sleep better at night when I fail people because it's my duty as a gatekeeper. I'm required to make sure that I only pass people that I think are ready to move on to the next stage, because future stages or the next stage could literally be working with clients, and I'll be damned if I'm not going to try to protect the public. Now, I'm not going to say you're done. I'm going to say you need to work on something extra. You need to take the class over.
And also, I would say the difference between, we saw this when we were teaching at the same time, that being a female faculty, if I am not the kindest, most gentlest, open-heartest, heartiest human, I'm a total bitch.
Right.
There's no.
I think you'd get called a bitch regardless,
But I was definitely seen as
meaning that women, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, is my point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I remember Carol Stanley, who has passed away.
Yeah.
I mean, I would see her as the most matronly.
Very motherly.
Very motherly.
To even us.
Yes. And she actually did her dissertation on how graduate school was too tough on students.
Oh.
And she and I would have these really interesting conversations. But then also, she was Presbyterian and I was Jewish. We would have these conversations about, what is too tough. Both sides of my family are from the southwest side of Chicago. And if you've watched The Bear, you understand the world that I come from. I will always seem too harsh. Always.
Well, I think that 98% of the students that I reveal this to are happy to hear this because they're working their asses off.
Right.
They're showing up. They're paying attention. They're making sure they have the energy for class. They want to be held to a standard that they're already living to. It's only the 2% of students that have a gripe with it because they have blind spots. There's nothing wrong with being stressed out or burnt out or overworked. I can work with that. But it's the people who have the arrogance to say, well, my perspective is that I'm doing okay. I mean, and it got to the point where at the beginning of the quarter, I would tell students, I don't know, this is the first quarter, so I don't know any of the students. It's the very first quarter for them. And I say, I don't know any of you, or maybe I know some of you barely from the internship or from the interview or something. But on average, one of you will fail the class. I don't know which one it is. I'm not saying this to scare you. I'm just saying that there's a threshold, and most of you will be fine. But one of you on average is going to struggle for a variety of reasons, and I'd laid out all the reasons, like time or burnt out or not ready or writing skill isn't at the level or didn't understand the assignment or whatever. The rest of you will be totally fine. You'll be well above the threshold and you won't really struggle. You'll be insecure because it's your first quarter at Antioch, but as long as everything goes according to plan, you'll be fine. But there's one of you. And 75% of the time, when I, as a professor for the past 25 years, when I give the paper back to say that it's not at graduate level or it didn't meet the requirements of the assignment or it didn't meet these rubric items, 75% of the time, the student will say, I'm wrong, which I find to be incredibly arrogant.
Yeah,
so
I once had a student throw a paper at me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I want to hear that story. But I find it to just be ridiculous that you have a brand new first-year graduate student.
This was in their final. This was an internship too.
Okay.
This was at the end.
But do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
this idea that somehow me, who designed the class, I designed the assignment, I even took the class in 1995. At the time, I might even have been program director of the fucking program. I'm the boss of all the other professors. You're telling me that I don't know how to correct my own paper after 25 years in this, 20 years in this profession. You're telling me that I'm wrong, and I get it. It hurts. It's scary. Let's talk about that. But do not claim that somehow I'm wrong in my evaluation, because when I send a paper back, I read it 7 times. I read it over and over and over again just to make sure that I'm not missing something, because I don't want to send a paper back.
Well, and also it's not just the paper, but the act of feedback and response is a huge part of working in this field.
Yes.
And if you can't take getting a paper back and rewritten, how are you going to act in the field when you are triangulating with a client, when you have lost your way with
when
a
you're
client?
getting supervision?
Right. And your supervisor has to say, hey, we need to talk about this. Are you going to say the same thing back to them?
Yeah.
You don't know what you're talking about. I know what I'm doing.
Right.
Like, that's dangerous for everyone.
Right.
So I think a lot of time what students don't understand is it's not just the paper, but we're assessing for how do you take feedback,
right.
which is like 50% of the job your first 2 years.
Yeah, if not more. And in the counter, I'll say that you do not have to be right, or you don't have to be not wrong. You can be wrong at times. In fact, you will probably be wrong a lot when you take a guess at something or when you try something new as to being a therapist. I will not gatekeep you for being wrong. I will gatekeep you for not responding to feedback well. You could be a very excellent therapist in terms of your skill at your stage. I could see talent, but if you don't respond to feedback well, then you're done because you will stay at this level. I've been paid expert consultant in legal cases where there's a therapist who is being accused of violating ethical codes or is being sued for something, civil case. And 100% of the time, the cases that rise to that level are cases of therapists that have done something pretty terrible, a number of things. And the universal personality trait of these individuals is that they were arrogant about their perspective and didn't ask for consultation. They didn't ask for advice.
Yeah.
And
a huge part of this work is collaborative, and it's not just being a healer. That's what I saw a lot in graduate school, is that people have a lot of fantasies about kind of healing others, healing someone that had the same wound that they had. And that's not really the work, as sad as it is. It's being with someone with something that you've never experienced and finding a way to be there with them. Being with someone who's done something that you find egregious and being there with them. And that takes knowing yourself at a really complex level and knowing the theory, because you have to rely on the theory, because if you rely on, I like this, I like that, you can't provide therapy to someone who's done something that you feel is really, quote, wrong, and therefore you're like kind of holding a theoretical way. Yeah.
Yeah, if you don't do that, then you're just some narcissistic listener on a corner that thinks they can solve everyone's problems. So anyway, getting back to the email, Patron Cat from Texas, she says,
hey, I learned a thing about Texas. Do you know it has the most banned books of any state in the union?
That doesn't surprise me. I hear a lot of, I would think Florida would be up there too.
Florida is second to Texas.
Yeah. Yeah, they're very active. In fact, I think there's some, don't quote me on this, but regarding evolution, there's some Texas legislation that Republicans pushed through that required biology textbooks, I think, to include some caveat around evolution, to include like, well, the science is still out, or some people think that God designed us or something, without saying that it's ridiculous. There's no evidence of that. There's not even really a way to test that theory. And because the Texas education system is so large and buys so many books, that it basically affected the entire education system of the United States. It's sort of like when California passes a law about
Right,
emissions of a car,
Yeah.
the rest of the country essentially benefits from that. Well, Texas and Florida are dragging us into the past, apparently. So, there's a lot of nonsense around that. Anyway, so the patron is saying that they have a professor that yelled at them. And so I don't know what that means. Does that mean that if I saw it, that the professor was being a total dick in yelling at you for being inattentive, or did the professor pull you aside after class or in a breakout room online and say, hey, I just wanted to let you know it seems like you're not paying attention. Oh, getting back to what I was saying before was that on Zoom, some students would turn off their camera. So when the pandemic happened, suddenly all of us professors and as a program, we had to work on policies regarding online courses. And we thought it was only going to be for a few weeks, by the way. So it took a while for us to solidify our thoughts. And since none of us, or very few of us, had ever taught online, we didn't even really have much in terms of opinions or experiences to draw upon. But after years of doing online teaching, eventually there were these policies that were passed by our program that said that you can't turn your camera off and this sort of thing. I did not enforce that rule. In fact, I think I even said at the beginning of class, if you want to turn your camera off, go for it. Because, look, it's your money, and I don't want to have to stare at your face as I can tell you're not paying attention. And if the class isn't interesting to you, then that's my fucking fault, by the way. So, it's my responsibility to keep your attention, even over Zoom. I have to change my way of teaching so I can make sure that everyone is energized and engaged. And our classes at Antioch are 3 hours long. So
it's long.
And sometimes you're teaching it from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m.
Yeah. As someone said to me at the time, oh, you can't fake your way through that. Which I thought was really funny.
Yeah. So I don't know what the professor was saying to you, Kat. You also say that your professor had to deal with you going through a tough time where you lost an internship. Your professor, that's their job. They're literally getting paid to deal with you as you go through a difficult professional experience like losing an internship. So I don't think you owe your professor anything for that necessarily. But going on with the email, my professor had a weird conversation where she said, I like to think of myself as your mentor. Mm-hmm. The context of the situation and how she paused afterwards made me feel like I needed to tell her how competent she was as a professor and supervisor, which I ended up doing. Rebecca, what do you think about that?
My hope is she didn't need to hear that from you.
Right.
Because that's just her job.
Yeah.
I mentored, for better or worse, a lot of people.
But what do you think about a professor just, we didn't see the conversation, but from Kat's perspective, it sounds like it kind of came out of nowhere.
I think that's the kind of, some students, I didn't think they understood what was happening. Like, I really could be a mentor to someone for the rest of their career.
Right.
There's other people that it was never a fit. But I think understanding that your professors and your fellow students, it's important. I would always tell students this who are like, I don't need to bond with anybody. And I was like, oh, honey, like, you need to bond with somebody here because this is the basis of your career.
You had students that didn't want to bond with anyone?
Yeah. Why
would they want? That doesn't seem normal. Oh, no. Am I bringing back some bad memories?
Some people saw themselves as much better than everyone else that they were in a program with.
And they would literally say the sentence, I don't need to bond with anybody?
Pretty much. That's not a direct quote, but...
Wow. So they're just like there to get their diploma and move on with their life kind of a thing?
Yeah. And I would have to say, hey, these people are, someone's going to get a job at a place that you want a job, and that connection is going to be really helpful to you. Or someone's going to get promoted before you get promoted, and they might be your boss. And
So is this in the context of a student being in conflict with other students or something?
Yeah, this was in the context of a student not working well with others.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. So you're trying to encourage them to make up with these other people or have a working relationship, and they're just like, I don't need to bond. I'm just here to get my diploma and get out.
Well, and
so they're already down a rabbit hole of trying to survive.
And in grad school, you have to do tons of group projects, and it brings up a lot of awful dynamics. I mean, my joke was like, if I had a nickel for every time someone was doing a group project and went into a complete spiral, I would be a rich, rich woman. The graduate school brings up stuff for people in unexpected ways. They didn't realize how triggering their peers were going to be. They didn't realize how triggering their professors were going to be. And then wait till they meet the clients.
Yeah.
And they're completely triggered. I mean, again, I'm going back to the example, but so many people had this fantasy that they didn't understand that they were really good, compliant clients. And they imagined that all of the clients would be like they were.
Right.
And show up on time and pay their bills and never yell at their therapists. And then, the horror of the reality of the work where you're learning how to do safe holds and safety drills and everything's locked down, including the supplies. And mental health, it's not a rosy field.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that raises a sort of a subtopic that I didn't feel like I had to explain it to many students, but would occasionally, about that. And you and I must have entered the field with what typically people have, which is the attitude that, look, I'm signing up to be a professional, and that means that I have to operate as a professional. It doesn't mean I'm not a human being, but I need to have a mindset that says I am responsible for doing what I can to hold it together and to tolerate things that I wouldn't tolerate in my personal life. Like if my friend decided to just berate me for an hour, I wouldn't tolerate that. But if I have a client who has a personality disorder and they're berating me for an hour, it doesn't mean I have to, quote unquote, just let it happen. But what it definitely doesn't mean is that instantly on the first foray into this berating, I'm telling the client that they need to get out of my office and never come back. People come to therapy because they have problems. And if we expect people to change and go to the places of trauma, then some things are going to happen. And also we're going to run into people that we tend to avoid, like people from the other side of the political spectrum. And I'm a professional now. When I go to the emergency room and there's a Trump supporter who is my doctor, and I'm wearing like a Black Lives Matter t-shirt or something, I would expect that physician would just treat me like any other patient and do their job, right? In the same way, we are the same. And I feel like most students understand that is the thing, but occasionally some seemingly don't.
Yeah. On the flip side, I was remembering when I was at my internship, a time that I yelled at my supervisor because she told me that to be seen as professional, I should be dressing dressier and I should be wearing silk shirts and have those shirts dry cleaned. And I remember yelling like...
Specifically silk shirts?
Yes, this was in New York.
That's so stupid.
I know. And I was like, I don't have the money for... Like, what? Do you understand?
Silk. Specifically silk.
Silk.
Like not rayon.
No.
Not cotton.
Right.
Not a blend, but
yes,
pure silk.
Yes.
That's the only answer.
I was like, do you have a lending library for me to like borrow these?
Or can you show me in the ethical codes where it says you must wear silk?
But her whole concept was like, as art therapists, we're at the bottom of the bucket, and so therefore we have to present as like so much fancier.
Okay.
And I was
Throw it out there, but don't.
So I am not, there were moments that I was an awful student as well.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't sound like you were an awful student in that moment.
It was going to graduate school in New York. I was really unprepared for how snooty it was and how they thought they were the greatest thing ever, and also how antiquated it was. I mean, we were reading Melanie Klein from the 50s and the hostile rejecting breast. It's as if bell hooks and the feminist movement has never existed. And I was shocked and horrified and was like, when are we reading something written in the last 5 years, if not 10?
Yeah.
And I got a lot of flack. And I think I've told the story that actually I had to have a different thesis supervisor that everyone else in the program had because I wanted to do my thesis on using art therapy with folks that had abortions. And he told me that wasn't art therapy. So it was like walking into 1970 and I was I railed.
Yeah.
Against it. I got a great education and then I can talk like someone that has a PhD. And that's like shot my career through the roof because this continually happened to me. I mean, I could totally hold my own with any of our peers who had PhDs because of that language that I had learned. But it was, my graduate experience was not pretty. It was rough.
Yeah. Well, so when getting back to the email from Kat. Okay. So you heard that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you could hear it, dear listener, but it's this weird Star Trek-y kind of tone. And once every 6 months, I'll be sitting at my desk here and I will hear that noise. But it's always from behind me. And by the time I turn around, I never know where it came from. This whole time, I figured it was actually coming from my Star Trek ship up there.
It sounds like it was coming from either from your guitar or from the vent.
Or from the vent. Right. So.
Is it the wind?
No. That vent is closed. That's just a heater. Yeah. So the guitar next to the vent, there's no way it came from the guitar. The guitar isn't plugged in. There's no batteries in the guitar. So it had to have been coming from the heater itself, which is bizarre. But then I think, well, was it one of the frames on the wall?
Oh.
Or the outlet? I mean, is something plugged in over there? Okay. I'm just going to make a note to myself.
Like the time of day, the temperature.
Weird noise.
I was here to witness it.
Came from vent. Okay, so I'm going to open that vent up and see what
is there something else we need to know?
I've opened that vent before. It's just a little self-contained heating unit that's like this big, and there's no venting. It's just right there, and apparently it makes Star Trek noise, which is concerning. And it doesn't even have really any there's no computer or speaker or there's nothing like that. It's just a on or off kind of a thing, and that's run by a thermostat. Anyway, so.
I need a minute. Hold on.
Oh.
That was so weird. So I had a double animal visit that I believe was a message from my mom.
Oh.
I was, crows are ever present in Seattle, but they don't usually interact with people that much, except if they're mad.
Well, unless you're Stacey
near a
and
nest. So I'm sitting in my, that cute little nook in my house by the window that everyone loves with the big chair and the, little table. I'm sitting there eating my breakfast. And this crow is on the little railing and it's like talking to me, like trying to get my attention over and over and over again. I was like, okay, buddy. And then I open my front door. We're in the dead of winter in Seattle. There is a huge bee, big, fluffy bee, dead, right in the middle, perfectly aligned, right in the middle of my threshold to step over. If I were to step over, I would step on this huge bee. So I think the crow was telling me about the bee. Mm-hmm. So I didn't know what to do. I know there's all this stuff online that when bees come to visit, it's because they're thirsty. So I put the bee down in some moss. But
do bees live outside of their nest in the winter?
I'm telling you, it was truly bizarre. Like, why? What is happening? So I laid out there and then, I was consulting everyone. And then I remembered that my mother was allergic to bees. And her estate had just closed the week before. And I think it was like a way, it was kind of the universe sending me a message that things were changing.
Did you want to talk about what you're telling me about? Is that something you don't want to talk about publicly?
I will, just because listeners have been following the story of my mom's passing, I will try and talk about this. I will attempt to speak on this issue.
Okay.
So
I mean, you could make it a general,
very vague. I'll make it very vague.
Yeah.
There's a player that could be identified in this story, but I'll make it vague. So my aunt wanted to have a memorial at the 1 year of my mom's passing, and it was supposed to just be cousins. And my mother had 40 first cousins.
Wow.
And there was 5 brothers on my grandfather's side, 8 siblings on the other side. 3 were bio to my grandmother, and then 5 were step. So there was a lot of people, a lot of cousins. 5 cousins agreed to show up to this event. It was very sweet. I was looking forward to it. We were supposed to read my mother's poems. 1 non-family member was invited, a poet friend of my mother's. He proceeded to be so inappropriate that I had to get off the call. He read... So we were supposed to just be reading my mom's poems. If you could just stick to the script, people. But no.
I mean, that's what we did at the memorial at your house. Or
yeah, that was, we were sitting,
Sitting
Shiva.
Shiva.
We were sitting Shiva. So this guy, so also my aunt is the admin on this call, which is a huge part of this, because if I had been the admin, I would just turn this guy off. But she's of a generation that you don't do that, and you definitely don't say anything if anybody's being... What this guy did was proceeded to read a poem, his own poem, about how he had always wanted to have sex with my mom. And he cases the poem by saying, this poem is full of innuendos. And I was like, this poem is not full of innuendos. Like, it's pretty good. There's no magic metaphor in anything that you're saying here. There's no illusions. I can tell. So it was so inappropriate, and I was so upset.
It's also gross.
It's so gross. It's so men of that era, too, right? Who are like, I'm having a sexual feeling. I have to tell you. I mean, this is like, it was so triggering about my childhood.
How old is the guy?
This guy is like 70, 80,
Yeah.
like...
It's gross.
So gross. And I had...
I mean, at any age, it's gross, but...
Right. And I had grown up in that world. So it was just so... Of course, this would be triggering to anyone. And I...
How many minutes are we talking?
The poem?
Yeah.
I mean, way too long.
Yeah.
Felt like forever, 5 minutes. But then he proceeds to say, okay, now I'll shut up. And he cannot shut up. Any comment that comes up, he has to begin speaking again and again and again.
And he's an outsider.
He's an outsider. And I have all of my cousins together, and people, between his incredibly rude interactions, people are asking really interesting questions, because it's like, we're all together. You know, we'll probably never all be together like this again. And people are like, have questions about family history. Why did this happen? Why did Rosella move to Milwaukee? And I was in middle school, and she was an English teacher at the high school. And, you know, like, people had really interesting questions. I finally got to learn. So my grandfather in 1943, 44 was drafted. They were so desperate for soldiers that they started drafting married men with children. Mm-hmm. My grandfather goes down to Fort Benning in Georgia, and is injured so severely in basic training that he's like hospitalized for months. And my grandmother and my mother go down there, and no one will house them because they're Jewish. And so they are in this woman finally takes them in, and they're on like a summer sleeping porch. So I imagine they were just freezing to death. And it's this huge part of my family history that there was. And I'm realizing now, as I look into this story, it probably saved my grandfather's life, that he was injured in basic training.
Yeah.
And it probably saved his sanity, because the end of the war was so brutal. And he's in his 30s, being asked to do what a 19-year-old... Anyways, so he's injured so badly that he never serves. And And I had always heard the story, but I didn't know how he was injured. So my aunt was able to tell me that it sounds like he slid down an embankment and landed on his shoulder. And in 1944, you couldn't just stick a pin in it and send somebody back out.
Right.
So anyways, I'm getting this amazing family history. And then we'll just call him Mr. Blowhard. Has to like chime back in again about something else. So it was so distressing for me that I started going off of FaceTime and turning the volume down so I could just hear when the cousins speak. Mm-hmm. I would kind of pay attention again when I saw one of their faces pop up. And then I just got so distressed that I got off the call of my mother's memorial.
Because this fucking interloper Blowhard. So did you talk with your cousins after?
I mentioned it to my aunt, and she kind of laughed it off. And I think that's really typical of that generation. Like, oh, that person's just being wacky.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, our generation would be like, shut that person up.
Yeah.
They're being inappropriate.
Yeah.
Eli, thank God Eli wasn't there. They would have, like, railed into that guy. Like,
yeah.
Nobody's business. But, you know, there's such a generational thing, which brought up all of my childhood trauma, too. Of
the childhood trauma of allowing a
right.
weird sexual man to just trounce all over women and harm everybody narcissistically.
Right. Like, oh, this is my childhood.
Right.
It's like, you know, of course, no one would say anything because that guy's got as much of a right to speak up and be weird and pervy as every, you know. So it was heavily traumatic. I do something that I don't do very often, which is that I posted privately on Facebook, like just to my friends. I was like, hey, folks, you've been following this whole story. I just need you to know that, like, one of the final things that's going to happen in this story was just really, really bad. And so many people responded. It was shocking. In this day and age where I'm like, is anybody even on Facebook anymore? So many people wrote me back channels. So many people who totally got it responded. One of the people I love most in the world who lost her son to drug addiction, she wrote me and was like, all of our grief journeys are specific to us. I mean, it was just like people were like writing from the heart in this way that's so rare these days. So
and it's not just a Zoom meeting or a FaceTime. It has tremendous meaning. It's sort of like a wedding, right? Where if something horrible happens on the wedding, like an uncle gets too drunk and like ruins everything, you can never have another wedding, right? You can't just do it over. It's not, even if you did, it's not the same. It's a sacred place that you step into. And there are supposed to be guardrails in place to make sure that, at least in all likelihood, people will walk away with a transformation, a memory, a meaning.
Well, we just talked about Jerry's memorial, too, of like, I felt so open and I got to talk to this person about their memory. And it was like, you know, I'm wary of going to my mother's memorial anyways. And it's like, my mother was memorialized exactly the way that she lived. And that was so painful.
Yeah.
Even with my aunt trying to run the show, with my aunt who like is the super ego of my family, she still can't control the chaos of my mother's life. Like, it's just like, oh, you want to do something about Rosella? Like, here comes this ship of crap. Here's the ship of crap.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm sorry that happened.
Thank you.
And so Jerry's memorial, which one did you go to?
I didn't go to any of them.
Right.
You went to one. The last time we podcasted,
I went to the first one.
You talked about crying as they
played
Here Comes the Sun.
Here Comes the Sun. And did I tell you about, I told you about Paul.
Yeah. Are you going to have him, you're going to have him on the podcast?
He came over yesterday and I recorded with him.
Oh, wow.
I don't know when this episode will come out, dear listener, but Paul David, my mentor and my career architect in the beginning of my career as a professor anyway, I talked with him and he told me recently that he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and that he is going to kill himself soon. And I don't know. You just have to listen to that episode. It's
going to be so powerful.
It's an interesting episode. he just seems so at peace with the whole thing. He almost seems like he's in a rush. I don't know. I kept looking for something I could relate to in Paul in terms of his reactivity. And I'm not in his shoes, but...
and I'll just say this, like family history plays so much into this. We had talked about this previously before you recorded this podcast. And the idea that he had caregiven for people with extreme Alzheimer's...
Yeah.
I mean, he does not want to go down that road.
No. I would do the same thing. I would kill myself as well. Absolutely. But his emotions about it are so at peace. That's the difference that I don't know, but I would imagine that I would just be up and down all day long every day.
And maybe you missed that part, right? Like maybe he's already made the decision and now he's...
It didn't sound like that.
Well, and also we know this about suicide, right? Like this is the statistical comment that if someone is sure of a plan, they suddenly become very calm.
Yeah. I mean, he also talked about how he has to do all this paperwork to get authorization to do it. And he's trying to avoid imposing on other people, not unreasonably, but I think he is... in a reasonable way, trying to make sure that not only does he not impose his later stage Alzheimer's on his family, on their emotions, on their life, on his legacy, on their pocketbook. People can go bankrupt.
Oh, yeah. No, it's the worst.
Yeah. So he doesn't want to impose on them.
My grandmother had Lewy body dementia, and the level of care that she needed was... She was very, very lucky that her second husband had invented the boiler bag.
The what?
The boiler bag. Do you remember the boiler bag?
What's that?
It was a perforated bag in the 70s that, like your frozen vegetables would come in a boiler bag.
Oh, he had money from the boiler bag.
Yeah.
I thought it was something that he put her in or something. So it's so wonderful that her second husband designed a straitjacket bag that you put in a vat of hot water.
No.
No. So he had a lot of money to pay for all that.
I mean, he had passed away, but it's the money literally from the boiler bag that allowed my grandmother to receive really good care up until the end of her life.
Boiler bag. I don't remember the boiler bag.
You should bring it up. So the boiler bag was a perforated bag that vegetables came in the 70s so that you didn't have to put your vegetables in the colander. You boiled them in plastic. Doesn't this sound like a good idea?
Well, I feel like that's kind of a new fancy thing that people do now. I feel like I see YouTube videos of people cooking in plastic bags and stuff.
Well, the perforated version, my grandmother's second husband invented. He also invented...
What's the purpose of having so you can pull it out of the water?
Yeah,
usually?
so you don't need a colander. This is the 70s. We're solving problems that weren't really problems.
Yeah, in my head, I'm just like, isn't that just another version of a colander? Or
yeah.
Like, why can't you just...
He also invented the aluminum, the process of turning aluminum. You know those aluminum tumblers from the 50s? Those they come in like jewel tones, and it'll be like an aluminum cup.
No.
Oh.
I mean, I've seen aluminum cups before,
Yeah.
but I don't know the iconic 70s.
No, this would be earlier. Anyways, he invented that process as well that turned aluminum
into a cup. Wow.
Also not good for you to drink out of aluminum. So, yeah, but it allowed her to live
Yeah.
But that was it for the money. I mean,
Yeah, so, I he's doing the nice thing, but I also think that another aspect that he's trying to do for his family is he doesn't want the suicide to impose on them. And this Switzerland organization, they provide the service that he's looking for, where he goes in and there's all the care and the family gets to be there and it's legal and everything. Probably they take care of the body, I don't know. But if he doesn't have that, then given our laws in the United States and Canada, he can't do it here. So
in the way that he wants.
According to him, there's no death with dignity when you have Alzheimer's.
Okay.
You have to be 6 months terminal.
Yeah.
So he would have to kill himself the old-fashioned way, which would, in all likelihood, would not involve any sort of physician or officials or attendants. It would be up to the family.
So he's flying to Switzerland?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, because that's apparently one of the places where they allow for this sort of thing. So, so he's obsessing on trying to get this Switzerland thing to work, and it's not for sure. And they're very. It sounds to me kind of like when you're trying to adopt a kid overseas, and all the paperwork, and they reject you frequently, and there's all you got to get that certified by that other thing, and we'll let you know, and then 5 months later, and it sounds just maddening. It's like, what more do you need?
Right.
A note from the doctor saying that he has Alzheimer's. What more do you need? What's the big deal? So screening to make sure the person isn't of a compromised mind. Then okay, move forward. Anyway, so yeah. Well, let's take a break. When we get back, let's finish this email. What do you say?
Okay, death and dying.
Okay, we're back from the break. So I don't know where we were in the email. Regarding mentorship. So the professor, according to her email, she says, my professor had a weird conversation where she said, I like to think of myself as your mentor. So patron, I don't know what the professor meant by that, but it is a bit odd that the professor would just kind of throw that out there. Maybe the professor just meant it casually, but typically in our field, that's a huge word. That's almost like a contractual agreement, that you're locked in as a. I don't say that
I
I'm.
would say it depends on the modality in the state. Like I offered that to any art therapist because at the time that I was teaching, there were so few of us that who else was going to be their mentor?
But when you offered it and they took you up on it, what did that mean you were agreeing to?
Support whenever they needed it professionally.
Yeah. Like if they reached out to you weekly over the phone, would you?
No one really did that.
But if they did?
I mean, I guess yes.
Yeah.
But then I had that too.
But that's what I'm saying. That's what mentorship means. You're agreeing with me that when we say I offer mentorship, we're offering a very potentially long-term, frequent interaction of guidance and answering questions and help and support. If people don't take you up on it, then that's one thing. But if they did, then that you know that you're agreeing to that. Now, if a dozen people took you up on that, you'd probably stop offering it to everybody because you wouldn't have time. But I would only offer that in very rare circumstances. People would ask me, "Would you mentor me?" And I would say, "No, I'm sorry, I don't have time." To me, mentorship is above supervision. Like supervision, you're required to do a certain level of service, but mentorship is for a lifetime. And also, mentorship means that I'm going to be thinking about that person independent of what they want me to be thinking about. Like if something comes along as an opportunity, I'm going to be thinking, I have a mentee that might be interested in that. And then I would reach out to them. You know what I mean? Anyway, not everyone who says mentor means that, but I'm wondering what this professor meant by that is my point. And my recommendation is that people don't just throw around that word willy-nilly. But anyway, end of this email. We had one-on-one talks scheduled with my professor, and she said that I lacked interpersonal skills and was too much in my head. What do you think about that?
Could be true. Hate to say it.
Well, why? Well, what is it about Patron Cat's email that makes you that?
Well,
for the record, for me, I don't know, but it is one of the things that I was going to say is like it's possible that even if your professor is a weirdo and potentially a problem, it might be that your professor actually has a helpful thing to prompt you about. So both could be true.
I mean, we've got a couple of pieces of evidence. Like if we're playing Clue and I'm just reading this email for clues.
If you had to put your money down on...
and we've also taught, so we've seen this scenario before.
Right.
You've lost an internship. Your life is really stressful and it's hard for you to pay attention in class. There's something going on in the way that you communicate that's not clicking, either for the professor or other people. And not to say that professors kind of talk, but this recipe is familiar for me for students that are like, wow, this might not be the exact right time for you to be in a graduate program. Or how much therapy are you in so that we can make sure that there's not some kind of family of origin issue playing out here or something else playing out?
Or, and I ran into this with students as well, in addition to those, that for some students, they either just need to slow down a little bit or just admit to themselves that they have some issues that they're still working on. I would have students that would have, a half dozen of pretty noticeable issues with their life and their academic work. But if they're humble about it and they're working
on it, right.
And it wasn't all fun and games. There were times when they would run into a professor or something and the professor would call issue with the same issues that other professors would, but it seemed like that professor was being unfair about it at the same time. So it's like, how do you sift through that? Just because a student has issues doesn't mean that the professor gets to just, stomp all over a student. So where's that line? But, there's a lot of possibilities. And, it's funny because when I read this email, I wanted to read it with you because most others, like if I read this email to Bob, he probably would have felt like he was on the student's side because he hasn't been a professor. Whereas for you and me, we have, and we've not only had the occasional student who did have issues and had a hard time knowing what those issues were. Also, we would hear from other professors or an advisee of ourselves, they would come to us not as a student, but as an advisor, and they would complain about another professor. And then we would go to that professor and find out the bigger picture, and we'd find out that it's more nuanced. Or we would be in a team meeting with all of us professors, and we would hear about a student who was up in arms and and that's not what Kat is saying. Kat's not up in arms, but the student was in a place where perspective was off or stress was up or something that was leading them to conclude that there was something wrong with a professor when in all likelihood it wasn't something wrong with the professor. You know what I mean? Now, can a professor have something wrong with them? Yeah, absolutely. Sure. I mean, I've had to fire professors for various reasons because of massive problems. So, I'm not saying that that's not possible, but when it's funny because you even detected it more than I would have, because right off the top of your head, you're like, well, we have this issue, we have this issue. So
because I've had to do this with students, right? You have to look at the whole picture. And actually, I'm thinking of a case where Jerry was on the other side and was like, there's really a problem with the student. And I didn't see it because they presented really differently with male faculty than they did with female faculty. And then it turned out that there was a huge problem with the student and they had to leave the program. So, yeah.
Was she one of our students? Well, I guess you didn't identify the gender of the student, but...
You mean was she in Marriage and Family?
Yeah.
I can't remember.
Okay. I'm just trying to think if I know which one it was, but because it wasn't frequent that we had huge problems. Like one out
this
of
one was huge.
A huge problem. Yeah. And this was maybe 5-7 years ago kind of a thing. Or no.
To turn the mic off.
Oh.
We've figured it out.
Yeah. I actually don't remember that student. It just, anyway. So, going on with the email. So in this talk, the professor says that she lacks interpersonal skills and was often too much in her head.
And I can say that students often don't understand what that means. And what that means for me is that you say to the student, hey, this is going on, and they instantly get really intellectual and just start talking. And they don't ask any follow-up questions, and they don't talk about their feelings.
Meaning you're bringing feedback to the student.
Right.
And it throws them into a defense of shutting you out by yammering.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is kind of a red flag as a therapist, right?
Right. Yeah, it could be that. Could be a dozen
And I'm sorry, Kat, we don't really know what's going on with you. We're just using you as an example.
Yeah. You say, at the end of the talk, she said, the professor, you won't be in my internship class next semester. I think she saw, I think I missed a paragraph. Recently my professor asked for us to fill out an evaluation for class. Afterwards, we were supposed to email her so we could receive extra credit for doing the evaluation. I left an honest evaluation of her class saying I think that the class could be more interactive and that the long case presentations were not as helpful as being able to talk about our cases in general every week. So then later she says that when the professor says, you're not going to be in my class next semester, she says, I think that the professor saw my feedback and decided not to have me in her class. What thoughts about that?
I mean, that's okay. Sometimes things aren't a good fit, and things have gotten so contentious that it's okay to find a situation that's a better fit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not for benefit for the other students if things are that contentious.
Yeah, it's really a win-win for everybody if there's a lateral move to another professor that you can move to, and then you can, I don't know, if there's a lesson to be learned for everybody. But the other thing that I will say is that it sounds to me, Kat, that you think that the professor knows which evaluation was yours, which if that's the case, then that's not okay. Now, you didn't mention it being anonymous, but I assume it is anonymous because usually when you fill out an evaluation on a professor or a class, you don't have to write your name at the top.
Well, and I'm curious if this decision had been made long before the evaluation had been
Right, right. It's possible that... Now, is it possible that a professor would be hurt by
an
evaluation
feedback,
and even just make an educated guess as to who left that evaluation and get so butthurt that they lose perspective or just consciously, vindictively say, I don't want to work with that student anymore.
See you later.
Yeah, could that happen?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's entirely possible, Kat, that your professor is a dick and there's really nothing that you need to change about your thing. And good riddance if the professor is rejecting you, honestly. Is it also possible, is it more likely, given our experience, that this was in the works a long time prior and that the evaluation doesn't really have anything to do with it? Because, your evaluation, if it's accurate, you're just saying, you wish the class would be more interactive with less long case presentations. That's not likely to hurt someone's feelings. I mean, that's run-of-the-mill. That's just a suggestion on changing, tweaking the class just slightly, right? The kinds of things that would typically hurt someone's feelings is if someone said something like, my professor doesn't know anything, or my professor doesn't know how to teach, or my professor doesn't understand social justice, or my professor has questionable ethics, or something along those lines. So I don't know, but it's possible that this was in the works. Now, could that rejection of you be unfair as well? Yeah, it could be. And, it's rough. When you are in graduate school, it shreds your ego anyway.
Oh, yeah. And
to have a weird interaction with a professor in any way, shape, or form is going to throw a typical grad student, including myself, for a loop. And then to just be rejected without any... So this is what I would recommend, Kat, is that you actually sit down with the professor. It's their job to do this. And you ask them in as open way as possible that you want to learn about how to be a better student, therapist, human being. You would just like to know the professor's opinion and honest feedback regarding them, yourself, and maybe even ask, and does that have anything to do with me not being in your class next semester? And write it all down and don't get defensive. Most of it might be bullshit. The professor could be stupid, but it's a wonderful opportunity. We don't get these very often.
No.
All of us are weird in a variety of ways. All of us are annoying in a variety of ways. All of us are aggravating to others in a variety of ways. Vast majority of people never tell us because they're being polite or they're scared or whatever. This is an opportunity to learn. I have received honest and accurate feedback in my life from people that I absolutely despise. And yet the feedback was, the way they worded it wasn't accurate, but the camp of the flaw of mine was accurate. And I have to, as a therapist, particularly and as really a human being, as a spouse, I have to be able to swallow that to some extent and let that in. And if I need 5 years of therapy to be able to swallow it, then that's what I need. But I benefit when I swallow that because it makes me a better person. It helps me to meet other people's needs and my needs. It enhances my relationships.
Well, and things are changing all the time. I mean, culture changes. A whole new community enters therapy that's never been there before, and you have to kind of relearn your language. And
as a therapist, you have to be able to adjust.
Yeah, generational stuff happens. I mean, right now I am processing with clients what it's like to watch genocide happen on TikTok. Like, nothing in our therapy training prepared me for this. Mm-hmm. Nothing in our therapy training prepared us for Black Lives Matter. Mm-hmm. Like, or the Me Too movement. Mm-hmm. Like,
well, I wouldn't say nothing.
Not nothing, but
not that specifically.
Right. And so, there's a way now that I have to talk with clients about the brain and information, and like I have to think it through myself. How I said to one client the other day, the first war that was on TV was the Vietnam War, and how much that traumatized that generation to see war on TV like that. Mm-hmm. And then this conflict, genocide in Gaza, is playing out on people's phones all day, every day. And it's just, our field is changing all the time. And if we weren't getting feedback and learning what was working and what wasn't working, there's a dynamicness to this work that's exhausting.
Yeah.
But amazing. Yeah. Like, my job is never the same.
Yeah. And life is messy. People are messy. And I am messy. And that's okay.
You specifically are a mess.
Yeah. So, Patron Cat, I hope that you can hear all the speculations on all sides of the spectrum that we've been throwing out, because we don't know. It's possible that you were treated unfairly this whole time. It's possible that...
And I'm just speaking from my own experience.
Yeah.
I don't know you.
Yeah.
I'm very curious what the school is of your school, what theoretical orientation that they're coming from. I feel like that's often... Mm-hmm. I mean, I should have never gone to a psychoanalytic grad program. I know that now. Mm. But, there's times that you're like in the wrong framework for how you work.
Yeah. There is a huge question as to why are you not in the internship class next semester? Is that just a normal thing, or what's happening there?
And would you be willing to hear the reason why?
Right.
I mean, I think there's a tremendous learning there.
Well, if you're going to be a therapist, you need to be able to tolerate that kind of thing, even if someone's giving you feedback that doesn't make any sense. We have to be differentiated and strong enough to be able to withstand that. I have very thin skin, so I'm not saying that I'm good at it, but it's something that I work on, because if I can't, then I can't grow, I can't learn. So, but I will say that there's nothing unsalvageable here. Some of my favorite students were students like you, Kat, that would come to me having had a number of experiences in previous courses like this. And when I would detect these students, then I would have a sit down with them and I would hear their story. And often I would find that they were treated unfairly and the student had issues. And I said as much. I said, it sounds like your professor treated you unfairly. Because, you have a student with issues of various kinds, particularly if they're kind of out there, then the professors who have cracks in their foundation are going to crumble under the pressure of having to deal with the student. Was the original reason of having to deal with the student valid? Yeah. But then some professors just have a really hard time knowing how to navigate that. And I've seen I could tell you multiple examples.
Yeah, I mean, and I taught one of the hardest classes. Did you ever teach multicultural counseling?
No.
Okay, so I taught that class like 10 times. Mm-hmm. One time I was teaching it twice in one quarter. And I had students that complained about the way I taught it and didn't like it. And then one of those students went on to teach that class and only taught it once and was like, this is insane. And I was like, no, shoes on the other foot now.
So that particular student / professor complained to you?
About teaching the class?
When she was in the class, she complained to you?
He
was in my case consult class and was not a big fan of mine. And then he came on to teach multicultural and just was like, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. And I'm like, yeah, welcome to teaching.
Yeah, especially that class.
Yeah, yeah. You think... So professors get a lot of flack, and I don't think students understand how hard it is to teach.
Yeah.
You need a real crazy skill set.
Yeah. So when I would come across a student that had a history like this, Kat, and this is my advice to you, is to find a professor that you can bond with. Because I found that if I could bond with a student when the shit hit the fan, which it likely would and usually did, I had an inroad to be able to go to the student behind the scenes and say, look, in class, it looked like something was happening. What's going on? Because, as a professor, you know how this feels when you see a student that has a sourpuss face or is not paying attention, or they're on their phone, or they're talking to their neighbors, or you get this scathing review halfway through because we had end of quarter and mid-quarter evaluations. And because, telling a professor what you don't like about a class at the end of class doesn't do you any good. So we would have these mid-quarter things. And you know exactly who it is. So it can be hard. And if you sort of reach out a little bit and then you have your hand slapped back and you just go down this road of hating this student, right? You're dreading going to class because of that student that is dragging you down. And it can be very, very frustrating, Whereas if we have an open line of communication and a little bit of a bond, then, human beings can be human, and we can usually work it out, is what I found. And I took on these students often as a sort of a mild mentorship, at least academically, as a way, because sometimes they were alienated by their own advisor, And so I took it upon myself to say, I'm going to help you. And that might mean that I'm going to tell you when you need to change, that you did something wrong here. If you don't want that kind of relationship, then I can't do anything to help you. But if I'm going to move in, I'm not going to just placate you and make you feel good about everything that you do. I will validate when you've been mistreated, for sure. But if you have something of an issue, and I found that most of these folks, these students, were glad to accept that because they felt safe with me and thus could hear me when I would tell them that there was something that they needed to change. So there's nothing about having this, and Kat, I'll say from your description, it doesn't even sound that bad, honestly. Like you could literally go on to another class and 10 years from now, you won't even remember this happened. We often as graduate students hold way too much, we consider these situations to have way more meaning to our career than they actually ever will. As long as you get that fucking diploma, it doesn't matter what happened.
Right. No one asks, how did you deal with each professor?
Yeah. Did you ever have any kind of, and plus a lot of us work in private practice, so we're our own boss. So we get to hire or fire ourselves. So it doesn't matter what happened in graduate school. As long as we have our license and our qualifications, it doesn't really matter. So, but I would
as long as we're able to connect with other people.
Right.
In the field.
Right. So
if you're not able to connect with anyone in the field, I would ask, why is that?
Yeah. So I would like to know, Kat, what you think about what we said, because, I'm curious. And also I just want to make sure that your feelings aren't hurt or that you're not demoralized.
Yeah. I really want to acknowledge how much we just used Kat as an example to talk about all of the wild and wacky experiences we had teaching, which is, in a way we are projecting all over Kat today because we come with our own stories about what happens in the teacher-student relationship. I was just looking at my watch. We've been talking about this for an hour and a half.
Yeah, we're very passionate. But, well, to continue the conversation.
I don't know how many emails we were supposed to get through today, but we got through one in an hour and a half.
Along these lines, a student threw a paper at you?
Yeah, a student threw a paper at me.
Tell me about that.
It was, she was almost done with the program, and I think she didn't want to have to work anymore.
Well, what happened?
I gave her some feedback, and I told her she needed to rewrite her paper.
Ah.
And she threw it at me.
Yeah.
I was just like, you got to be kidding me.
What was her demeanor? Like, fuck you, I'm not going to do it? Or?
Yeah. I was like...
Really? So let me get this straight. So you hand her paper back, and it has. She looks at the front, or what? Tell me the details.
I mean, this was. I can remember exactly what room I was in. I was in that first room coming up the stairs in the old Antioch building that had that big art closets. And we're on the second floor.
Yeah, and this is like maybe 6 students.
Yeah.
And they're on their internship. And
Yeah,
this
so
student,
they're
this
very
student
far along. They're at least like 3 years into the program.
And this student is weeks away from graduating?
You know, they're in their third or fourth quarter.
Okay, so maybe a few months from graduating.
Yeah.
0 to 6 months from graduating.
Yes.
And you're asking her to rewrite a paper. Yeah. And by then, usually students are kind of done with academia and they're mainly focused on clinical work as an intern.
Yeah.
And yet they have requirements that they have to fulfill. And so
they have to write 2 papers a quarter in this class.
Yeah. So you send this paper back and you hand it to her. Then what happens?
She threw it at me and like stomped around and it's like, I'm not going to do it. And I was like, well, that'll have repercussions.
She literally said, I'm not going to do it. I'm not. She stood up and walked around. She literally stomped around the class and said, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah. I can't remember what happened next. But I was like, this says a lot about you.
You don't remember what happened after that?
No. Because I was just like, I cannot believe this is happening.
Oh my God.
Yeah. High drama.
It's like a third grader.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's funny the way that students were often like, you know, they are showing you so much about themselves in their tantrum. And you're like, okay, you know, you're clearly having a tantrum.
So lay people always will immediately ask, as many of the listeners who are lay people will ask right now, how could this person possibly have thought they would be a therapist, and how could this person possibly be a therapist today? Because I'm going to take a guess and say that person graduated and became a therapist. So how is it possible? Answer that question.
I mean, in graduate school, you know, the students are stressed out. I've seen all kinds of behavior, and you just try and put it back on them, just like you do on clients, and say, try again next week. You know, try and get yourself together. Explain your behavior. If not to me, then to someone else. Know that this is the requirement of being here. And yeah, why are you losing it right now?
Do you remember the other students or your colleagues? Do you remember anything?
I remember the other students. The other students were used to this student's level of drama.
Yeesh. Did the student ever apologize? Do you remember?
I can't remember.
Golly. Do you think the student would have apologized or at least acknowledged?
I think our experiences of being a female and a male professor, and then, you know, students, again, like that story I told about that same student later teaching a class, you know, they see you 3 or 4 years later and they can be much calmer. You know, sometimes it was the experience of graduate school that was like making them crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was like, I cannot believe this is happening.
I would hear that from my female colleagues. I would hear that from you and other professors who experienced that. And it was always women that would tell me these kinds of stories. And it's like a fantasy story to me. I can't imagine that. I've never had anything close to that. I had another colleague who she said that one of her students threw a chair at her, actually trying to hit her with the chair. And I believe her, just like I believe you, but I can't visualize it because you're talking about like gravity not existing or something because...
Well, I'm talking about sexism.
That's what I'm saying. Like my privilege says that I don't even know what that looks like.
Right.
I can't
because
I haven't had anything.
Imagine something like that happening and being like, yeah, that's the kind of shit I have to put up with. Like that, you know, I'm not allowed to be an authority. I'm not allowed to be respected in authority.
Yeah.
The other person doesn't see me as having authority, nor would listen to me.
Right.
And feels like an act of violence towards me is perfectly normal.
Yeah.
Perfectly in the range of
almost
possible.
like you're below them or something.
Yeah. How dare I ask anything more of them at this time?
Because, you know, I've had some difficult experiences. I mean, if I recall some of them, my hands would literally start sweating out of a trauma response. I've had some difficult experiences, but nothing like that, where I wouldn't know what to do. I would go like, am I on candid camera? What's happening right now? Like, this isn't even in the realm of possible weird behavior that I would see.
Did you watch the last season of The Crown?
No, but I want to. It's on our list. I love that show, and this next season is about Princess Di, and
There's a tremendous amount of death, but there's an interesting scene between Prince William, his future wife, and a girlfriend, and a fourth person comes up and asks for his autograph, and he completely freaks out, and he says, "You don't know what it's like to be looked at all the time, examined all the time." And both of the women are like, "What on earth are you talking about? You think this is special to you? It's extreme for you in a weird way, but like, we are looked at like this all the time." And it's just...
Yeah, especially for them. I mean, my God.
Yeah, but the scene is really well done. And, it just reminds me of what we're talking about right now, where he's like, "You can't possibly know." And they're like, "This is every day for me." And, this is actually one of the reasons that I stopped working at Antioch is there is now, but there was no panic buttons in any of the classrooms. And so if something had ever gotten out of hand...
Like violent-wise?
Yeah. I was like, I feel so unsafe here.
Did anything ever happen?
No, but there was no phones. I mean, there was a way in which, like, if you have, the majority... If you have a ton of women in a space that's got open access in the middle of Belltown... there's a level of security that I always wanted that wasn't there.
Yeah.
Did you look up the boiler bag?
I did, but all I got was just pictures of vegetables in bags.
Are they perforated, the bags?
It didn't look like it. And also, there wasn't a... I mean, I assume I spelled it right.
I mean, how many ways can you spell boiler bag?
Boil a bag, right? Well, there's boil the bag peanuts.
Oh, no, that's different.
Boil in bag?
Boil in bag.
Boil
Yes.
in bag. I thought you said boil a bag.
I was called boil a bag at the time, but maybe it's...
It looks like various different brands have a boil in bag service. So boil a bag. So is it hyphenated? Boil a bag?
I don't know. I mean, this is a term from the 70s that probably didn't make it onto the internet.
Yeah.
No.
Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology of Seattle. Everyone out there,
that was deep.
please take care of yourself because...
Oh, man. Valentine's Day is coming. We're thinking about you. Love is love.
Well, by the time this episode comes out, it might already be Valentine's Day.
Then love definitely is love.
And Love is Blind, Season 6, comes out on Valentine's Day.
And we haven't even talked about the new throuple reality show, Love in Paradise.
Yeah, you sent me. What is this?
So there will be, I don't know if they're married, but at least committed couples. And then there'll be a series of singles who are willing to join the couples and become thruples. And there will be a well-known LMHC, or is she an LI? She's a social worker and a PhD in sexology. She will be the consultant, woman of color. And it just looks like a mess, and I can't wait to watch.
And what brand is this? Is this Bachelor?
This is on Peacock. I don't know what...
What's it called?
It looks like a Love in Paradise kind of thing.
I mean, Love in Paradise, that's a bachelorette thing, right?
Is this couple to throuple?
I'll look up your text here. If you were given a chance at non-monogamy in paradise, what would you do? Mm-hmm. I'm Scott Evans, and I will be your guide on a journey for love unlike you've ever seen before. For the next month, four curious couples will be given a unique opportunity to turn that fantasy into a reality. I've never been on a date with 3 people. You know what I'm saying? Me neither. I'm bisexual. And he's more of a don't knock it till you try it sexual. Yeah, that's me. It's kind of like for our first time dating as a couple. We make a good team. Check. Let's go. Peacock original. Every few days, they'll invite one of 14 open-minded singles to throuple up with them in the resort. Lots of B-roll of people making out and... lots of different configurations of gender, and there's bikinis, and there's water. They're at a resort. There's hot tubs. Do they usually have a sexologist on site? Last night was a workout. Yeah, last night was a fucking workout, girl. Will they commit to a life as 3? Will you be my girlfriend? I just got chills. The compatibility is off the charts so far. Or will this experience reveal that the throuple life is not for them? At the moment, I don't see how sex works.
So I just want to say I'm committed to watching...
Couple or throuple is what it's
couple
called.
Or throuple.
Couple to throuple.
Couple to throuple. I'm committed to watching couple to throuple if you are. Or I can self-report back. I'm what I've learned.
I'm trying to limit my fucking work. So I
will self-report on couple to throuple.
So at the very least, I'm sure that the listeners would love to hear from you.
And if you watch couple to throuple and you have things you want to talk about, because I have big career news. I don't know if I told you this.
Yeah.
But I got accepted.
Oh, yeah. You don't know if you told the listeners this.
I didn't tell the listeners.
Yeah.
So the goal 25 years ago when I went to graduate school was to become a sex therapist. And all of my work in the beginning of my career was in adult psych, which is not appropriate if you're trying to become a sex therapist. And so I gave up on that dream. And a couple of months ago, a program that I respect...
So wait, so before you went to graduate school, you're like, I want to work in...
Well, I was doing HIV, AIDS, and sex education. I mean, I was already doing...
Then why did you go to a psychoanalytic grad school?
There's so many questions. I didn't know what I was doing.
Oh, it was the 90s. There's no internet.
It was the 90s. There was no internet. Beth was in... I was going to New York to be with Beth. And graduate program was just about that. And I didn't understand.
There might not have even been a program of sex therapy or sex education.
Yeah. Who knows how I ended up on this path? But we're 25 years in. This email comes across. I love CIIS in San Francisco, California Institute of Integrative Studies. They do a ton of great stuff. I'm going to be doing my tarot workshop with them remotely through their continuing education department in September or October of 24. And they announced that they are beginning their sex therapy certificate program for people who already have a master's in counseling. Totally remote. And then I look up who the faculty is, and Dr. Bianca Laredo, who I already love and already take classes from, is the first professor that pops up. It's like, okay, this feels like a sign. They are hiring people I want to learn from anyways.
So the goal career-wise after graduating would be to work with what sort of clients?
I would love to work with perimenopausal people about negotiating intimacy after menopause because it's such a ride. I'd love to work with pre-orgasmic female-identified people. Someone asked me if I was working with couples. And I was like, couples? Ew, no. I'm working with couples around sexuality. But when I was looking...
What's you about it?
I'm not a very good couples counselor. But, you know, all of the stuff that I'm already thinking about, gender, sexuality, pleasure, pain, trauma. My joke is, you know, I don't want to do as much trauma work. And everybody was like, Becca, who's going to come to you for sex therapy? But somebody who's, you know, combining the trauma and the sex.
There's a spectrum of trauma, though.
Yeah.
And you probably get towards one end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And if you advertise differently, I imagine you'd get a different level of trauma on average.
And when I did a little market research, there's not a lot of folks who are over size 4 in Seattle who are sex therapists. Like,
Yeah.
definitely.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know, but I'm about to have a round body, size 18 midsection, and be a sex therapist. And I look forward to meeting other round bodies who want to talk about how they experience intimacy.
Yeah.
But I was thinking, like, if I had the body that I have right now and some size 2 therapist was telling me about pleasure, I would be like, there's a whole lot of factors that you don't know. First off, nothing is built to work for me.
I mean, not necessarily would they not get it, but it is a lot easier to understand when you're living the life.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm excited. I mean, it could be a total bust. I don't know, but there's going to be, well, you know, I have all these fantasies of like, it'll mean community. Same reason everyone goes into a program. I'll meet people just like me. But what was funny was when I posted this on Facebook, several people were like, oh, I was planning on doing that in the fall. And I was like, oh, no way. I can't do it in the fall because I work so much in the fall. So yeah, I will probably be thinking more and more about sex and gender than I ever have. And when I've told all my clients, like, hey, I'm about to do this really intensive thing, just like I told them all when I was doing sensory motor.
and I might be thinking about different things and talking about different things. And already the lens of what my clients are willing to talk to me about is radically shifted. And I'm realizing most of the clients that I currently have could probably count for one supervision session because they're now willing to talk to me about issues of intimacy. So I am very excited.
And personally fulfilling as well?
I think so. I mean, this is the work that I left when I went into that psychoanalytic grad school program. It was like the HIV/AIDS crisis didn't exist. You know, it was all about mommy issues. And I'm like, I just went through like the most terrifying medical crisis of my generation. And no one wanted to talk about that. And like when Matthew Shepard died, no one wanted to talk about that in my program. I mean, I'm thinking about all of these issues around sex and gender and sexual identity that I couldn't talk about in graduate school. Well, someone said to me, "Oh my God, you're going to be the mom on sex education." And I thought no one had ever given me a greater compliment in my entire life. So yeah, my life is going to open up and change, I think.
And content for the podcast.
Yeah, I am excited.
So if people have questions,
Yeah.
don't email them yet because
Right.
Rebecca's
I'll announce, I guess, when classes have really gotten started. And
When will they start?
I think they're starting in February, and it's like intensive Zoom weekends. So talk about turning the camera off. I think I'm going to paint all the way through, so I'll have some paintings.
How many students in the program?
I don't know.
Probably not a lot, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm assuming between 5 and 15.
Yeah.
I mean, who does stuff like this? You already have to be a therapist, so that like selects. But I was shocked in my own peer group. 2 people said they were also considering it. So there's something going on.
Oh, yeah. I get a lot of questions about sex therapy and certification in sex therapy. And we started a program at Antioch
Yeah, I
for
saw
that
that.
reason. And like, I don't know, 5-7 years ago or something.
And I'll be looking for a supervisor too, which is interesting. I'm looking at all these people locally.
Yeah. Most of them probably graduated from Antioch, honestly, or associated with it, because there's not a lot of programs out there.
Yeah.
So I can give you advice about who you should be working with.
And then there's also these interesting continuing education trips that are go to Germany and talk about sex therapy in Germany and visit a German sex toy manufacturer or go to Japan or so I'm like, oh, this is kind of opening up a whole world.
I can't wait to hear about that.
Yeah, I've been in trauma treatment really hard for the last 20 years.
You need a break.
I need to switch it up. I've got 20 more years of working, probably. Knock on wood. And what's kind of next? And for those people who knew me in the HIV/AIDS era, they're like, "Oh, welcome back. Like, we missed you." And that's a wonderful feeling. Of like, so there's a line in a George Michael song, "There's someone I forgot to be." And I'm kind of having that moment of like that empty nester moment where you're like, wait a second. There was something I wanted to do. And now I have the time and the space to do it.
Yeah, empty nester, right. It's like, oh yeah, reconnecting with my 25-year-old self. What George Michael song is that?
Is that, I think that's Freedom.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes.
Some to be, and then I knew what I wanted to be. Yeah.
Right. You're right. Sometimes the clothes. That's my song,
Brand
by the
new
way.
place and a new place.
At my funeral, please play that
on
song.
MTV.
Sometimes the clothes do not make the man.
Man, when that song came out, I was prime dance club.
Yes. Cheers to that.
19.
I still dance to that song.
And
my ass off.
I couldn't get into clubs because I wasn't 21 and I didn't have fake ID, but I had a friend who was also 19, but he was a mover and a shaker in that world, and he knew how to do all the techniques to get into clubs back then. We would find people with a stamp, and we would
copy the stamp.
Well, we would lick their hand, and then you would transfer the stamp to your hand.
Yeah.
And you would hope that the bouncer wouldn't see that it was mirror imaged.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Another thing he did is in his glove box, he had like 25 different pens with different colors, and because the ink would change.
Right.
And so he would.
These are all well-known techniques.
He had this technique of copying it, and then you would smudge it because you're at a dance club.
Sweaty. Yeah.
You get sweaty, and then you get in. Another method was to ask someone to go in and then go to the back alley, because this is at what they called Celebrities back then, Pioneer Square-ish area, in the real kind of old school alleyways.
Yes.
And
Dingy.
yeah, like
Life is occurring. Every body fluid is in that alleyway.
literally
Right now.
And it's still brick.
Yes.
You know, it's still like non-paved.
Yeah. You
and,
gotta spray
and
that.
cobblestone.
Oh, yeah.
And so he would tell someone to go in and sneak into the kitchen and then open the fire door, but then leave like a coat hanger, because if the door didn't shut, maybe an alarm would go off. But if you wrapped a coat hanger that you unraveled around the push bar and put the wire through the side of the door jamb, then someone could come along, i.e. us, and pull on that wire, and it would pull the pull bar, and then we'd walk in. And then we'd have to act like we were part of the staff, which was a whole thing. And then we would get into the club. So that's
All of this is to dance to George Michael.
that song. Just
Yeah.
we would probably listen to
If
that.
you've never heard that song, George Michael's Freedom, it was actually in those a cappella movies with Anna, what's her name? They
Glee?
Not Glee.
Oh, High School Musical,
No. Oh my God.
a cappella movies.
Yeah, it's the girl group.
Yeah. Well, Anna Kendrick is a fan of this. She's a patron of this podcast.
What?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Anna Kendrick, I'd like to speak to you individually. Huge fan. Huge. Your work in the a cappella movies that I cannot remember the name of, but I can see them perfectly. I have a playlist of just songs from these movies. They do a version of Freedom that is so amazing.
Pitch Perfect.
Pitch Perfect. If you've never listened to the Pitch Perfect version of Freedom, you're really missing out. Anna Kendrick, thank you for your amazing brilliance. I feel your energy right now. Woo! Anna Kendrick. I think Anna Kendrick is one of the most brilliant women on the planet.
Yeah.
Everything she does.
She a great actress, great singer, super funny. When she's in comedies, she's just hilarious.
I was transported just by... I feel differently now.
Right? Mm-hmm. She's probably a fan of yours.
That's insane. No, I'm just flashing through all of Anna Kendrick's greatest moments. In my mind, she was in this great movie. There was this great TV show about dating life, and she gets pregnant and doesn't end up with the guy that has the baby, and then ends up dating someone else. And every season is different. They follow someone else's dating life, and it's so good.
I'm looking at the TV show. She was Viva Laughlin.
No.
Fear Itself.
No.
She was on Family Guy. Comedy Bang Bang. Saturday Night Live. Lip Sync Battle last week.
This was on HBO. It was just.
Was it a movie?
No, it was a single season. It's about dating. Anyways, Anna Kendrick, thank you for your presence on the planet.
Yeah.
Anything you need from me, Anna Kendrick? Send in your sex questions.
Yeah, Pitch Perfect, 1 through
Perfect.
3. I love the Trolls. People aren't huge fans of Trolls, but I love Trolls. Mike and Dave Needs a Wedding. That's the movie where she is. Every year I watch that movie. And
Really? I've never watched it. Mike and Dave need wedding dates.
So it has Zac Efron and Adam Devine. Counter them, you have Anna Kendrick and Aubrey Plaza, which is, I'm a super fan of Aubrey Plaza.
Yes, who's not? The show is called Love Life.
Huh.
And she's in season 1. And it's just a delight. And Up in the Air.
Oh yeah, that was the
God,
first thing I'd
great
seen her
movie.
in, and she's really great. Scott Pilgrim, she's great in.
That Scott Pilgrim, I think we should watch that movie together.
I love that movie.
Mike and Dave Need Wedding Dates. I need to, oh my God, it's like a gay fest, that
It's
movie.
so funny, that movie. And she plays a really funny
Into
character.
the Woods is a fantastic movie, and she's great at that as
I
well.
never saw that.
It's a musical.
Yeah.
Ooh, 50-50. That's a heartbreaker.
Paranorman, great movie.
Paranorman is one of my favorite movies. I try to watch it every year at Christmas.
End of Watch is one of my favorite. Well, it's not my favorite, but it's one of my top
in the
cop
Twilight
movies. Yeah, she was in the Twilight movies. The movie that she's great in, but the writing is terrible, is 50-50.
I was just saying.
So I love that movie, but she plays a therapist.
Oh, she does? She's so young.
And the way they portray her as a therapist is that, you know, they always portray us as unethical and stupid and out of our element and unprofessional. And the way they wrote this character in 50-50 is a pretty egregious example of that. It's not, of course, the great Anna Kendrick's fault for the writing, but I was not appreciative of that role, of that writing. Anyway, so...
God, take care of yourself. Anna Kendrick, you take care of yourself. We need more of what you're up to. Kirk is laughing hysterically.